What's up, Geeks and Gamers? It's Odin coming back with a box office breakdown for this past weekend, which saw Insidious: The Red Door, let's just say it, pretty much demolish Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, especially when you account for the fact that Insidious in its opening weekend, because they are much smarter with their budgets over at Sony, especially when it comes to films like Insidious, has already made its money back. Whereas Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, though the 56% is not nearly as bad as things could have been for a movie like this with such bad word of mouth, has still $200+ million in the red. Right now, I think $300+ million in the red, and likely will end somewhere around that figure, especially when you take into account the fact that Disney does not actually report their budgets. However, we will absolutely be getting those numbers because since they did film much of this in the United Kingdom, we are obviously finding out more information as these tax returns, as this tax information is getting released about how they spent well over $100 million more than projections on a film like Doctor Strange 2. One can only imagine how much was actually spent on Indiana Jones, and let's just say it's probably a lot higher than that $300 million that is being estimated at this point in time. Regardless of any of that, though, you have films like Insidious and Sound of Freedom, both of which in their opening week and opening weekend, obviously Sound of Freedom had a little bit of an extended run opening this past Tuesday on July 4th, but it has already made its money back and is now making profit, which means Sound of Freedom is completely destroying Indiana Jones. Now, again, I know some of you might be out there say, but yeah, 121 million domestic for Indiana Jones versus 40 for Sound of Freedom? That doesn't sound like destruction. Yeah, but remember, that 40 million means that they are making money. They are profitable. They are actually making a return on their investment. And especially when you remember that Angel Studios is not the actual producer of the film, but rather got these rights from Disney to be the distributor. And I think the cost for it was around maybe $5 million or so. That means that the amount of money Angel Studios is making off this film is quite a large amount. Whereas Disney is continuing to lose hundreds upon hundreds of millions of dollars from massive flops like Indiana Jones, Elemental, and The Little Mermaid, of course, amongst many others, probably more to come in this coming year. But going into the numbers themselves, again, Insidious Red Door got the number one spot this weekend, opening to $32.6 million. What do you find funny is that Tony over at Deadline, what's going on, Tony? Says that it slams, he loves his puns, right? The Red Door slams Indiana Jones. Very, very, very funny. But he also said that this was a surprise, right? That this was a bit of a surprise. The film did so much better than what anyone had ever thought that this film had any possibility of doing. And yet, not really going into just how much detail there is in regards to just how terrible Indiana Jones is doing by comparison. So again, would love to talk about and would love to point out that film surprising in the case of Insidious: The Red Door, and also would like to even further tear down a film. And again, this starts to make you ask questions about places like Deadline amongst so many other places, because when this talks about, and again, this also gives, again, trying to give somewhat as positive coverage as possible to a rated R raunchy movie in Joyride, which looked gosh awful. But when you actually get to the discussion about the film Sound of Freedom, it is, again, emulating a lot of these same talking points that we've seen from so many other mainstream media outlets. It says, the film everyone is talking about, that is indeed true. The word of mouth on this movie has been absolutely insane, even though the media has been trying to label this film with every single label, with every single hashtag that you possibly can think of to try to tear this film down, try to paint it as just a pure Christian movie, try to paint it as an alt-right film, as a conspiracy theory film, even though all of it is based on truth. All of it is based on reality. And again, the fact that they are talking bad, not about the film itself, not taking a look at an objective lens or through an objective lens, but instead purely subjectively trying to tear this film down, aside from right-wing groups funding ticket sales here and Angel Studios energizing, I guess I'm a right-wing group. Because I know I bought a couple of tickets. I know a bunch of other people who have seen the film and others that don't feel comfortable seeing the film have already bought a lot of tickets through this, pay it forward stuff. So the whole concept of, a bunch of alt-right, right-wing conspiracy theorists, they're the ones making this film do good, is just insane. But it's interesting here. It says it'll get third place with 16.9 million. However, Angel Studios is saying that they've made around 18.2, around $40 million for 6 days. And it says, don't know where that extra magic money is coming from. Amazing, though, how you will call out Sound of Freedom. You will call out Angel Studios for the numbers that they are themselves reporting, and not take them at their word for it. But when the major studios call out, when the major studios give their numbers and give their estimates, you don't even ask a question. You don't even take a moment to pause, even if the numbers don't sound necessarily right. So, Tony, seriously, man, you need some help. All right, this movie should be honestly at closer to the top of the list. The fact that you put Sound of Freedom below, and again, you could say it's a new release. Well, guess what? So is Sound of Freedom this week, but you put it below Joyride, which did significantly worse. Come on, if it's not clear already, the narrative and the agenda that the mainstream media has, Tony from Deadline, I think, is a great example as to exactly what is going on. But guess what? You're losing. Pure and simple, you are losing, because think about how many kids are going to be saved because of the conversations being started by Sound of Freedom. Think about all of the creepy people that are going to be taken down because of the Sound of Freedom, right? The abusers of children. Think about how many of them are going to be taken down because of this movie. This movie should be praised, right? Even if you don't like objectively find fault with the movies. And again, I found some faults with the movies, myself, with some of the pacing and editing. But even then, guess what? Those are objective qualities that you can absolutely talk about. But when you are going to go after this movie for things that are especially not even true, come on, man. You're showing your hand a little bit too much. But let's go ahead and dive into the numbers. So Insidious, $32.6 million opening weekend. So very, very impressive numbers for that film. Indiana Jones, Dial of Destiny dropping 56%. Oh boy, this movie, because of its drops, is guaranteed itself to be a $200+ million loser at the box office. Disney is in a lot of trouble with this movie. Angel Studios, as I said, just like Insidious, has already broken even after its opening week. Again, getting upwards of $40.2 million in its total overall box office sales. And again, despite whatever Deadline might be trying to report here, the fact that they spent so little to get the distribution rights on this movie from Disney, they're making money, whereas Disney is losing hundreds of millions of dollars. Same with Elemental, 21% hold. Again, we are actually seeing Elemental's opening week, or the first 2 weeks compared to where it is now. It's actually a chart breaker. This film is actually doing really well. It's on charting to be a chart breaker, meaning that the film is doing much better than what the initial weeks are, were actually indicating. However, it's not going to be nearly enough for it to make up for the massive amount of money they spent on this movie and just how much money this film is end up going to be as a financial loss. Spider-Verse continuing to add to its totals, getting very close to $700 million worldwide. We'll probably cross that easily by the end of its run. Joyride opening to $5.8 million. No budget yet on this movie. However, based off of it being just a typical comedy, and typically you find that these movies, for some reason, they spend probably more than they should on it. I kind of look at this as like a No Hard Feelings, where they spent, 25 to 35 million on that. So opening up to 5.8 million, that's a sign of a flop right there from this movie. And if you've seen the trailer for Joyride, it just looks abysmal. It just looks really bad. No Hard Feelings at $5.2 million. Again, doing better than what had been expected, but still not doing well enough. Transformers Rise of the Beast also in a similar position, where it's doing a little bit better towards the later end of its release, but because it had such a small initial release, it is also still in the red. Little Mermaid is also, of course, still a failure. Ruby Gillman would be a failure on paper. However, it is important. Valiant Renegade, shout out to him. He did point out that when it came to this movie, that Netflix essentially already paid Universal basically for this movie, which means that even though one would, again, the film itself is a flop, meaning that the movie itself is losing money. It's not making money based on how much was put into it. The studio in Universal is not going to take a loss here, since Netflix has already paid for it as far as the budget is concerned. Red Door worldwide has made $64 million, again, being able to make quite a bit of profit already after just one weekend. Indiana Jones at $247.9 million, again, might seem better than what some were expecting, but is still far cry from making up its massive budget, in addition to its massive marketing costs. Sound of Freedom, again, kudos to Angel Studio. Kudos to everyone involved with this movie. Again, this is such an important film. Even if you are feeling that you're not comfortable seeing the film, go to angelstudio.com, or angel.com, I should say, and go ahead and support the movie by paying it forward. It's been because of a lot of regular everyday people paying it forward that so many people have been able to see this movie for free. That's what the whole thing is, that you're paying for someone else's ticket for someone who may not be actually able to afford it. But it's such an important film, I think, because it's getting everyone talking. And guess what? The sides are becoming very, very clear. Who's on the side of kids and who's not. Those are really the only two sides. You're either on the side of kids or you're not on the side of kids. That doesn't mean that you can't have legitimate criticisms of this movie, but if you're going to go after it for just fake conspiracy nonsense, then you're showing what side that you're on. Elemental, $251 million, still a flop. Spider-Verse, again, getting close to $700 million. Joyride, massive disappointment there. No Hard Feelings, again, not doing all that much. Transformers as well. Little Mermaid, not doing all that well either. Continuing, but again, better than what had been expected. Still going to be probably close to a $100 million loss for that movie. And then Ruby Gillman is in that weird financial situation. Some might be asking, what about The Flash? Why aren't you talking about The Flash? Well, remember, it was taken out of a huge portion of theaters, so this film is only at $261.5 million worldwide. So, yeah, and what's interesting is that this would have been probably the biggest flop of the year had not Indiana Jones come out and had they not spent as much money as they did on this movie. So, again, both flops in their own right, but this film most likely going to lose quite a bit more than anyone else. Going over to the chart, because we love doing charts here over at Geeks and Gamers, we actually can make some projections on Ruby Gilman. As I mentioned before, again, on paper, is a financial failure. It is not going to make its money back, but because of Netflix paying for the production costs, it's not going to cost Universal much of anything. Still, film is definitely not what we would consider a financial success. Indiana Jones Dial of Destiny, we can now project will make somewhere between $354 million and $500 million. So in order to get to $500 million, it would have to double what it's made so far. It is not showing that at all in any of the markets that it's in. So an average of probably less than $400 million is likely where this movie is going to end up. I would not be surprised to see this film come in closer to its minimum projection because of just how bad the word of mouth has actually been. And seeing that they probably spent well more than $300 million, again, we'll find out for sure next year when those numbers come out from the United Kingdom. Good luck, Disney, trying to hide those numbers. Again, you, I guess, have a slight delay here to trying to pin this off. But even if you take just the $300 million that's being given here, you're still talking about $150 to $200+ million in financial losses. And again, that is using the probably conservative estimate of what this film cost, what the marketing costs were for this movie, again, using typical marketing standards. So we're talking here about a film that will probably end up losing for Disney close to $300 million when you take all of those other things into account. Let's just say it is a catastrophe right now. Nightmare scenario for them with this movie. No Hard Feelings is still in the red. The Flash, Elemental, also still massive flops. Again, when you take into account what the probable actual numbers are and elevated marketing costs, probably getting closer to $150 to $200+ million losses for both of those movies. And of course, you've got Spider-Verse continuing to add to its overall profits. Again, kudos to them for doing so. Also interesting, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, pretty much done in its theatrical run, is actually getting very close. Some people may have said, why do you keep saying 850? It seems like a possibility. Well, it's actually already bumped itself up to $839.7 million worldwide based off of the numbers today. So again, $850 million is definitely not out of the ballpark, so kudos to them for being able to actually pull that off. But the big story, of course, is Sound of Freedom, Insidious, both breaking even, right? So it's amazing how so many people will try and point out saying, you know, everything is gloom and doom, everything is flopping, right? So the box office is just not doing well all around. No, it's that the movies that they are spending crazy amounts of dollars on are not good enough to bring people in to actually go and see them. Whereas if you have films like Insidious, which has a dedicated fan base, right? I'm not saying that this movie is good, but there is clearly a dedicated fan base that shows up for these types of movies. And then you also have a film like Sound of Freedom, which is not only having a fan base, right? Meaning you have people that want to support movies like this, but also because of the message of the film, it getting crazy word of mouth, it getting a lot of positive praise. The fact that you have major YouTube reviewers themselves, and shout out to all of them who have covered this. I think Jeremy Johns has covered this amongst others. Like, seriously, kudos to them for being able to go out to this movie, to support this movie, and to talk about, again, how powerful it actually is. And this is, I think, the big discussion of the day. Sound of Freedom, Insidious. Hey, guess what? Profitable movies have made their money back, have actually made it and added to their profits. Right now, you have about maybe Sound of Freedom having about $1 million in profits, probably a little bit more than that because, again, of the way in which it works with them only having really spent about $5 million for the distribution rights to this movie and not having actually produced it, whereas Insidious is already looking around $14 million in profits. So, hey, kudos to them. But what are y'all's thoughts about this? Let me know in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button. Whatever it is that you're watching, make sure you smash it. Check out a fuller box office breakdown over at OMB Reviews. You guys are all awesome, amazing, beautiful people. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.